James Felton Keith has too many first names, so most people call him JFK. He is an award-winning engineer, economist, and author who has defined personal data. He has founded and incubated countless companies. A staunch progressive, he says that it is necessary to have a mind of a CEO and the heart of a social worker to solve real people problems. He's an activist who just happened to go to engineering and business school. JFK currently serves on the boards of the New York County Democratic Committee, the Democratic National Committee, out in Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math, and the New York City Black and Latino LGBT Coalition. He is frequently keynote at global venues like Future Tech Congress, Money 2020, and Hopeful Global Forums, to name a few. Most recently, he was honored as one of the United Nations International Young Leaders Assembly members, the United Kingdom's Technology and Investment Financial Technology Delegation, an IBM Global Entrepreneur, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security's commitment to diversity, and multiple 40 under 40 notices. Take it away, Jasmine.
Welcome, everyone, to the Uncover Podcast, Episode 5. I can't tell you how thrilled I am to be introducing today's guest in just an ever-changing world where, personal data kind of affects your every move. The world is changing at every moment in the way that you utilize data, you share data. So I am really pleased to introduce today's guest, and I'm going to give you a little bit of background on him. His name is James Felton Keith. He's a man with 3 first names, which is what everyone says. It was easy for me when I met him because I just thought, well, he's Congress and his initials are JFK, so fairly easy to remember. So a little bit of background on James, who I'm thrilled to have on today. He's an award-winning engineer, economist, and author who defined personal data. And he's going to share that with us today. He's going to talk about his book that's out in stores right now and conferences that he has going on. But just a little bit about his background. He has founded and incubated countless companies, but most recently, and how I was actually introduced to James is through his the New York Personal Data Week conference. And that's something he's going to talk about today. He's the chairman of that and really responsible for getting that off the ground. And, he's going to share his visions for the growth. He's here in New York, as am I, so it makes this video easy. He's built a global ecosystem of cyber insurtech, which I'm probably saying wrong, via cyberspace. He's going to talk a lot about that. He's going to talk about how it's related to the IBM Watson, who we all know about, backed predictive analysis. He's going to talk about a little bit about his fintech career. And I mean, for me, the important thing is that he's running for Congress. I'm super excited. I've never had anybody running for Congress on this podcast. So he's a tremendous young man. Honestly, I'm reading his bio, I'm like blown away. He's served on several boards at the New York County Democratic Committee, the Democratic National Committee, out in Science, Technology, and Engineering and Math, the NYC Black and Latino LGBT Coalition, and he's a frequent, as am I, keynote speaker, so that's the fun thing. And at global venues like Future Tech Congress, Money 2020, Hope Global Forums, just to name a few. As you will see, he's fairly young, and he's won awards. He was honored as one of the UN International's Young Leader Assembly members, the United Kingdom Technology and Investment Financial Technology Delegation, and much, much more. Too much that I can't even do it justice. So welcome, James, to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You are welcome. So to clarify all that I probably just messed up there, can you give us, you're in the world of personal data. To me, honestly, and probably the people that are watching and listening to this, they may not know quite a bit about that. So can you tell us how you got here today? How all those things that I mentioned, your background ties into that?
Sure. Well, I started as an engineer, and my formal educational background, I guess, is engineering and economics. But my work life is more involved in the study of culture. it's an anthropological term called ethnography. And it's the study of culture. And I guess what I do on a day-to-day basis with the companies that we founded and the trade association and the conference is I try to study culture to see what products and services fit within, you know, the existing culture, because it helps with go-to-market strategy. I think as an entrepreneur, I'm sometimes less concerned about products and services and more concerned about how a product or service goes to market, meaning how a consumer would digest it. And so in that sense, it's more important to study culture to understand how a culture is ready to adopt some innovative thing than anything else about the company, that is. Mm-hmm. And so with that in queue, sure, I founded a few fintech and insurtech companies. You did say it right, by the way.
Excellent.
Yeah, I think the new way everything is working is tech is just thrown at the back of every old term that we used to have. So finance is now fintech, and insurance is insurtech, advertising is ad tech, health is health tech. And so I've been participating in that space for a while, probably the past 10 years. And we've been noodling on this concept of personal data. Now it's, I think, a relatively new prefix on the word data. Everyone hears data, it's floating around, it's in the cloud, it's in weird places, it's in our hair, things like that. But the concept that everything that we are has a digital component is, I think, relatively new for people to consider. And so one of the core reasons we merged over, or rather I merged over into politics, is I wanted to make it a more common conversation. Mm-hmm. Where the conference Personal Data Week came from. Early on, I was thinking more about products to help people control their data, help people with privacy and security and things of that sort. But a lot of the products that we worked on didn't have a good go-to-market strategy. The culture of the people who would need to use these products for them to be relevant didn't really exist. And so we kind of got pushed into facilitating a conference to make sure that people understood what in the world we were talking about. Mm-hmm. As we found, most people had no idea what we were talking about. And that kind of brings us to today. So yeah, that's where I am. I guess that's the work that I'm doing. It's just trying to make sure that people understand, you know, what this concept is, what these products are, and how they affect their lives.
Okay. So, you know, what's interesting is that you talked about market data and you talked about culture. And it's interesting because, you know, I own a digital marketing agency and a lot of my clients are in marketing. Mm-hmm. And I think it's importantly for them, you know, maybe you could just dive into that a little bit more in terms of application sense. You know, how does the methodology change for, let's say, a market research company, and how they're, you know, assessing a new market and going after and building findings and helping to build a new product, like you said, or service or new brand? Like, what's the application? Can you help us visualize that in any way or give an example, anything like that?
Sure. So from a marketing standpoint, I think, you know, marketing and ad tech firms are really at the cutting edge. So they're kind of trying to quantify everything that fits into the human experience and then place some sort of metric on it. Mm-hmm. So the way we might track how, you know, wearables, how, you know, wearable watches and devices work, how they tell us not only how a person is exerting energy, but where they are in place and time. And we can actively correlate that with how valuable certain, you know, neighborhoods or certain locations, you know, certain gyms, certain convenience stores, etc. How valuable that real estate is really based on the human transactions that happen there. I think when we say personal data, it's interesting because you have this other concept, big data, that's out there that I think people in the bubble know. Even like with the insurtechs and fintechs and all those things, I feel like it's a bit of a bubble. I did a conference a few months ago. It was a big data symposium in the Midwest, and it was at a university, and a lot of the IT students walked into the conference. They had no idea why we were there. They were like, "What are you doing at my school and say, well, we're here for the big data conference. It's for you. And they're like, I've never heard the term big data.
Really?
I had to kind of put into perspective that the first big data conference that I had gone to was, maybe 2009. So that was less than 10 years ago. So this whole concept that data is upon us is very new.
That's right. Yeah.
So I think advertising is one of the few places that has an endowed point of view around what data is, because advertisers are actively turning it into products. So if you didn't know anything about me other than what you see on the screen now, you just know I'm the kind of guy that might buy a blue suit or a white shirt if you're selling it to me. But if you want to cut costs and be as productive as possible, you wouldn't try to sell me polka dots or stripes, because
right.
Not enough. Hopefully you could learn more, maybe through a tweet or something I say that I like. I might say, I love Charles Tyrwhitt or whatever. You can go, okay, so we're going to sell them, vertical stripes from that place, because vertical stripes make everybody look taller. And who doesn't want to look a little bit taller?
That's true.
Right. So, you're taking in this information, this marketing information about people's lives to better provide them the products and services. And the reason we acknowledge it is because we think that there's a value play there. We think more than the security and privacy context that personal data has on top of it right now, we think that the really interesting argument is, if I am a part of the production process of selling James a blue jacket or a white shirt, then it's possible that I'm entitled to, maybe 0.02% of that transaction. I don't know exactly what that number is, and I'm not sure that negotiation is as relevant as the fact that my culture or whatever I do in physical space is a part of the production process for what an advertiser might sell me from their digital knowledge of me. But that's just from an ad tech or an advertising standpoint. I think the most explosive, realities of personal data are, I think, in other regulatory segments. So your healthcare data is really valuable. Your financial data is really valuable. Your insurance data is really valuable, and your location data.
So I just have a quick question for you. I don't mean to interrupt, but I don't want to lose my train of thought. Is what you're doing, is it more important? Is kind of your mission more about the protection of this data, or the revealing of the data to perfect the way that companies and brands use personal data? Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I think if I understand your question well, I think it's the latter. So I'm concerned about, obviously, protection is something that we need to always focus on. Security is something that we need to always focus on. But the way I understand how the world works is, as technology drives culture, not the other way around. And so security, in my opinion, is more of a culture than a tech. And so if security is going to happen, you and I and others around us have to agree to play well in the sandbox together, right? So that we can, move forward and do things in a safe, forthright way. But I think the way people talk about data and everything right now, or security in general, is as if we can just protect it right out of the gate. It's just not so. So I think I'm less concerned with the overall security, and I'm more concerned with, which is why I'm in politics now, with incentivizing people to be good custodians of everyone else's security. And I think that the best way to do that is to distribute some sort of ownership stake in the value that is transacted by personal data. Now, I'm aware that was a mouthful, even that last.
Right. Like, how would that translate to an average citizen?
Right. I think ultimately what we want to do is, across those 5 different regulatory, areas, the Internet of Things, location, insurance, finance, and healthcare, we recognize that data is being clocked in all 5 of those places on our regular lives, day in and day out, and products and services are being built on them, left and right. So what we want to do is give people some agency over really what we think is their personhood. It's just now personal data is a representation of whatever your personhood is, right? So the way that looks is by giving someone ownership of that or agency of that, they're able to better facilitate security and protection because they can hold the entities that control that data more accountable. Mm-hmm. So I don't necessarily mind, as the millennial in the room, I don't need to control all my data. But if you are Google, for instance, and you make a savvy decision on my behalf, I want you to be able to do that because you might be smarter about, you know, that thing than I am. Mm-hmm. What I want is my piece of the pie if I'm a part of the production process.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
And now because I have evidence that I'm a part of the production process, or that my personhood is a part of the production process. What I would like is to be indemnified, and if not indemnified directly, meaning you're sending me my 0.02%.
Right.
Seems nominal, but I think when you look at that across every sort of interaction that we have, it starts to become a really, you know, large number. You know,
that's right, and that has to do with contribution, right? Just in the general sense of the word, right?
You're absolutely right. I think in my newest book, I have a whole segment where I differentiate contributions from creation. It makes me think about, remember the first mentor I had when I started my career as an engineer. I used to design seats and airbags for Chrysler, and I had this mentor, and I wanted to be, you know, this executive guy when I was younger. And I asked him, his name was Frank, and I just said, Frank, how do I, you know, get to where you are? And he just said, well, you have to create value to get here. And as he elaborated on what it meant to create value, he really meant I needed to kind of build a wall around myself, you know, fill it with things, and be able to kind of like block everyone to make the things that I controlled as valuable as possible. I'm not saying that that's totally irrelevant these days, but I was a bit more wonky philosophically, and I just thought, aren't I just valuable? Like, don't I contribute value? So I think one thing I like to do in differentiating contributions from creations is I like to say that individuals contribute value intrinsically, no matter what they do. And groups of individuals or institutions, you can call those companies, they create value because they all pour things in, and then they, you know, they come out of that pouring in process with products and services that they're going to use in the future. And so if everyone is a part of the contribution process, then whatever is created, everyone is entitled to a piece. I'm not saying they're all worth the same piece,
right?
But you know, if you're a project manager at Corporation A, and we've automated away the things that you've done in your life, but the company is still more productive because of the process that you set into place, you're probably still worth some of that productivity. I think the majority of the problems that we see in the market right now, especially the job markets, it's not that jobs have gone away. I think the statistics show that there are a whole lot of jobs right now, probably even more than there were previously, but they don't pay the same. It's because of a mechanism to distribute value in the same way that we used to, which just used to be time via jobs. But now that we're getting a lot more productive with our time, and we don't see people who do jobs that have been automated previously as being as valuable as someone who did them before that time, you know, we tend to value them less. I mean, at that same job when I was designing seats, I started doing that at 23, and I was in place. I moved into the place of a guy who had been there for 32 years.
Wow.
I made, you know, $25 an hour, but you couldn't tell me I wasn't rich. I worked like 70 hours, and I thought, no one's competing with me right now. But the reality is they brought me in as a contractor. They paid me less. I had no stake in the company. Those products that I developed, we're a part of the patent process, and they're still in production today. Chrysler 300 or Challenger or Charger, right?
I love those cars.
Yeah, I've been hands-on with those seats, making them work. So the point is, again, I'm not saying that, you know, I'm owed a couple $1 million by this particular company, but if I am a part, if I'm an input to the productivity process, then I should be indemnified for that.
Well, I love what you're saying because, you know, I write a lot about, you know, I feel that any business owner, any entrepreneur out there has a responsibility to serve the community, really, and to support the economy. I write about this stuff all the time.
Yeah.
And what I've found, you know, in running a business for the last 12 years is all of all of the hiring, has dissipated to go to all these other countries. That's first of all, right? Yeah. And then secondly, I love what you said. I mean, I'm always shocked at these salary rates for people that have so many years of great experience, right? So I really enjoy what you're saying, because I think maybe this model that you're talking about, that we're trying to visualize here, right, is a way to get people involved with a process to not only improve the economy, but I think make people feel, just better about their everyday lives, better as being contributors, and I hope that, I mean, the topic of this podcast is Uncover. It's all about, distilling and uncovering the truths in business, and in your case, in government issues. But so, yeah, I mean, I think that would help, because I find that a lot of the deceit and lies that go on, not in the government, I have nothing to say about that because I don't know much about it, honestly, but in business happen because people are trying to step all over each other, because there's outsourcing and all these things. So I love what you're saying, and so can you tell us a little bit about, how you're relaying your message, how you're, like you talked about, how you're educating people through your books, through your conference. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I think each audience is different. I think at the conference, the main thing that we try to do to differentiate with the conference is establish personal data as an asset class. So I think we've had some help in doing that. The World Economic Forum called personal data the new asset class in 2011. I think the Economist magazine and so many others talk about personal data as the new oil. And that's important because in most conferences that deal with personal data or data in general, they either talk about the analytics or they talk about privacy, safety, what have you. At this conference, I think what blew people away this past August was we had a bunch of financial analysts talking about this asset class and what it looks like when you bundle it, securitize it, insure it, put it in the markets, etc. Every other group that we had an advertising segment, a finance and insurance segment, a policy segment, a healthcare segment, but every other group really just talked about, whether it was advertising or healthcare policy, we really just talked about where data comes from. And the financiers in the room made it tangible, because they even talked about mortgages as personal data security. When you think about mortgage-backed securities, if I'm writing a mortgage on you, I want to know your likelihood to be able to pay up. I'm going to give you a loan, right? I'm going to give you a loan. You're going to give me 10% down. I'm going to give you 30 years to pay it back.
Yep.
What I want to know is what you've been doing, the last couple of years of your life and how likely it is you're going to pay it. But I want to look at you entirely. I want to see who you are, what your background is, who your family is, and if you are the kind of folk to pay this loan back. And so it's a trust from me to you to say, I think I generally trust you enough to give you this and manage a little bit of risk and say, I'm going to put an APR on top of it, right? And so I think people hadn't considered data in that way. But now in this age where data has been proliferated, we look at all of these new contributions, all this new input. And so I think the most interesting thing, at least in these highbrow conversations that we have at a conference, is the fact that, I'm an economist by training, so I'll just look at productivity as a measure of input. Actually, if you go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics website, right on the front page, they show a video about productivity, and I know who creates birdhouses, and she has certain inputs. And the way economists establish productivity is just as a measure of input. So the way we think we've kind of turned everything on its head is to say, now your input, evidence of it, rather, is personal data. And if you own it, you can make a formidable argument that you're entitled to some of that value. And so you're not only entitled to it there, but you're entitled to, if Tesla's share price goes up because they're collecting personal data from inside autonomously driven vehicles, and no one uses gas anymore and everything, solar power, et cetera. It's like, what is valuable? What is the valuable asset that we're valuing Tesla on, where they are worth more than Ford Motor Company, which they are as a...
That's right.
It's almost mind-boggling until you get down into the data that they're going to use. I'm sure they've got some other products with batteries, et cetera, but the interesting point is, in this new data age, we can recouple all value back to individuals and away from products and services. Not to say that products and services aren't still valuable. People still need things. But the reason that people need things is what's actually valuable. The fact that this particular jacket and the white shirt from earlier is what makes it relevant. Because if I didn't, then something else would be more valuable to me. But I would still be a piece of that equation. So I guess to answer your question, I think in different audiences, we talk about personal data in different ways. I do try to get everyone to understand the idea that this is evidence of their contribution. But mostly, when we talk to people, at least in the political arena, we just talk about the idea that they are valuable in general. And we try to say something that people aren't normally hearing. I think the only other group that will say you are valuable are, like religious leaders. They mean it in an abstract way, but they definitely mean it. And we want to acknowledge that and say we mean it, but also in a tangible way. So when I say you have value, I mean it's a fact, and I can prove a whole lot of it. And I think to your earlier point, it sets in a new sort of, dignity that comes along with being a contributor in an economy. And that's the way, people used to think about their jobs.
That's right.
Still think about them that way. It's like, I am valuable. And what does that mean? And I want to see that come back to me, monetarily and otherwise. I want to have some pride in what I'm doing. And so that's really how we, kind of reduce the conversation. We just talk about people's value and ask them what it means to them. And we just riff on whatever it means to them, because we can always tie it back to the data. So we think, that's the new world, is being able to couple value to the individual and tell them that they should own a piece of it. It's the most capitalistic American thing that you can advocate for, to say, now that we know you have value, it's over there in that bucket. You should own a piece of the bucket, or that you should own the whole bucket. And, we should see what that turns into. Maybe it's, a roof over your head. Maybe it's healthcare. Maybe it's education. Maybe it's, whatever you desire. So in the political sense, I feel like we need this philosophical, technological undertone to make any of the rhetoric, real. So that's really why we move into politics now. Now that it is real, you have to make it a casual conversation.
Okay. We have about 10 minutes, and I have a few more questions for you. So one question it's just glaring at me, and I'm having a little hard time hearing you, so just speak up a little bit when you answer, if you don't mind. It's just a glaring question. So when you talk about personal data and you talk about raising the visibility around personal data and its use and the country as a whole at a governmental level, I mean, the glaring question for me is, do you have any concern on how intrusive this might be? It's just a glaring question. Do you have a concern on how intrusive that might be from a big brother watching, ruling, guiding thing versus letting people become creators? And I know it's a sensitive subject, but I just had to ask you how you feel about it, how you approach it,
I mean, well, to be honest with you, yeah, I'm terrified. I think just like everyone else, it is a problem. Or at least a potential problem. It may already be a problem that, I don't have privy to, where there's someone watching down on every single thing that we do. I think permission is what's interesting from a product standpoint. Like, how do we curb certain permissions to peer in our life from a digital standpoint? That's number one. And I think that we can do a lot of that through not only products and innovation, but also from the policy standpoint. But I still think that's why I think, arguing for ownership is omni-important. Because if you are the owner of these properties, these digital properties that I am, call me big brother for lack, for the sake of this conversation, right? I'm peering in. You want to be able to hold me accountable for proper use, number one. You want to be able to hold me accountable for flagrant or fraudulent use, number two. So you need the right to retaliate. And even though there are a lot of interesting products and services out there that talk about data or help you control data or help you get off the grid and things like that, that's cute. But without a broader human right that exists at a constitutional level, you don't really have the legal right to retaliate in a substantial way. like we all saw what happened with Equifax.
Oh, yeah.
Well, yeah. And so like 140 Americans were affected, but a bunch of foreign people were affected too. About 200,000 Brits were affected. And because they have certain laws in place that will hold Equifax more accountable than Americans do, when we think about the value transfer, let's say if Equifax was sued to oblivion, and let's say their whole value is $100, the foreign people with rights to retaliate against Equifax are going to sue for a larger stake of that, $100 value than we'll be able to. And that's not really fair because we're the majority of the people affected. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So we won't sue them thoroughly here in the United States. We may see some things from the SEC, et cetera, but we won't really hit them as hard as the Europeans will. And with that variance in policy and constitutional rights over data ownership, it really kills our ability to defend ourselves. And I think that's what it comes down to. When we think about privacy, when we think about security, when we think about Big Brother, the real question should be, what sort of rights do I have to defend myself?
Right.
Proven tactics come after that. So I'm just as scared as anyone else, and that's why I think we have to put these things into play. And
Yep.
somebody from the industry can really establish it in an endowed way.
Yep. Agreed. So 2 more questions for you. One is, this is related to the podcast, if you don't mind. So, I mean, everybody that I have on here, I want them to be really truthful about, and this is really to help, it's to help people just like you're doing, right? Yeah. I'm looking to help entrepreneurs, and I'm looking to help executives get some tips from this podcast that they can implement into their business and in their lives. And one thing I'd love to hear, and I ask every guest, is, tell us, a story about how you failed in your career and how you've overcome that.
Oh, okay. Well, I got a bunch of those. But everything I know now is because I have stepped in every pothole and on every landmine. I'll say early on, around 10. Well, yeah. So maybe around 10 or so years ago, I ran a fund in South Africa, and I was a bad judge of character, ambitious about how much money I thought that I could make. That was my sole driver at that point. And had this business partner who essentially robbed the fund of, a nice sizable amount. And it really killed the margin that we were trading. I mean, we traded, commodities, contracts, mostly CFDs, which is like a cash contract on a futures contract. It stands for contract for difference. And anyway, when we lost the money and I realized what was happening, I was sort of at a crossroads. I remember I had some mentors at the time that just said, this will show us what kind of character you have, like what sort of integrity you have. I wasn't legally bound to recover all of the money that was lost, but I felt a sense of ownership. I felt like I owed these people because I was a sales guy. I knew everyone who was a part of the fund. And so I, retaliated against my former partner to, make sure that he spent time and paid for what he did, but also try to recover, everyone's money over time. I think the only people that I didn't get their funds back were some of my family members.
They'll forgive you, right?
Yeah, they forgive me. Everyone is good now. But I think it was a time in my life where I was out in the world. I was living abroad, and I had to kind of write my own ethical code. I got really desperate for a time, and I started thinking about desperate options to recover money or keep the company afloat. I was trying to protect this entity that probably shouldn't have existed. And I had to step back and reevaluate, what my values were and why I was doing any of these things. And, I started writing a lot more. I guess I've always been a bit of a writer, but I didn't write to publish. I just used to kind of journal to myself. And in doing that, I started to establish what my ethical code is now and what my drivers are. And I think it made me a better Entrepreneur made me, a better executive. It made me a better manager of people, because ultimately where I settled was that I, wanted to be a good custodian of value for people. When I always thought about the equity markets, I thought that they were just the most awesome agreement of people to try and trust each other and trade, in a public space. Bajillions of people doing this all at once. And I got, blindsided by the real money potential, and it killed me. I was naive. I was younger than I am today, but I had to refocus on value. And I had to refocus on the people who entrusted their value to me to see if I could help them scale it. And my life has been about that ever since. And I think over the years, I've grown into being this, good custodian of people's trust. It's translated away from just financial management, but also in how I interact with people in the corporate space, the relationships that I cultivate, how transparent I am about myself, and how transparent I expect other people to be. And I think it helps. It brings you some of the best relationships. I feel like I'm in one of the best times in my life. The people that I'm available to and the people who are available to me are just 10 times as awesome as they were 10 years ago. I think it's really because it became a culture change. To say I'm going to focus on people's value first, and see what I can add to that, and make those the problems that I rack my brain about. So it's changed. It's changed every company that I've been involved with since. But yeah, 2007 was a dark point.
For a lot of people.
Oh yeah, well yeah, right. Then they got even. Yeah.
But no, I know. You said a few key things that, in my own experience, I got to tell you, James, it really rings true. When you're an entrepreneur, right? And you were talking about having a business that, I've been running my company forever, and you got to be your best spokesperson, your best salesperson. Sometimes you run into situations where, when you're, I wouldn't say immature, but immature in business,
sure,
you might come desperate. You might not have the answers, and you go the right route to just prove your point, Yeah. And right. So I think the maturity level that you were talking about is important to say, and especially I love what you said around values. Like, I have my MBA, 2 MBAs now, and still my favorite class was business ethics. That's what it's all about. If you're not ethical, you're not going to go home and feel good about what you're doing anyway, right? But what's important that you said is that, and I see it in my own business, is that if you start to surround yourself with the people that share the values that you have cemented, you're going to see tremendous change, right? And I think that every entrepreneur needs to go through that. A lot of times I feel like I'm just advising other entrepreneurs. You can only do that because you've been there, right? So, all right. So I know that you have another meeting coming up. So I have one last question for you. Obviously people want to get in touch with you and they want to know what's going on. So, what announcements do you have? What's coming up for you that's important, whether a book or event, and how can my audience get in touch with you?
Most of everything with regards to the campaign is at just votejfk.org, or they can go to jamesfeltonkeith.com. The book is out. It's, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, you name it.
And what's the title again?
The title of the book is Personal Data, and the subtitle is The People's Asset Class.
Nice. Okay.
And so, we're just really trying to integrate that with the campaign, but we have a bunch of events set up at votejfk.org, mostly here in New York, but we're going to be in Florida, we're going to be in Michigan, we're going to be in California, talking about these issues. We're going to be, I think, in Vegas now, talking about these issues to just make sure that people's value is the new conversation. It's kind of beyond hope, beyond dreams, like value is the new thing. It's like, where's my equity? I think
I like it.
American wants to talk about that. And now it's a reality that we can identify where it is and distribute it to them. So
very cool. Well, I know I'll be at your event and I'll bring along my New York crew. So
great. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. Well, listen, I know you got to run. So thank you so much for being on the podcast. And, I'm sure that I want to have you on again. So I hope that's okay with you.
Yeah, I can't wait.
All right, cool. All right. Well, good luck with everything you have going on. And again, thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this podcast, and I know that you did, please hit subscribe on iTunes and on YouTube. You can also support us through Patreon and becoming a board member. As a board member, you will get early access to episodes, top 5 lists from our guests, as well as various action plans, such as action plans for personal branding online, LinkedIn marketing, and much, much more.